Dave, just before we started up the show, I was looking at the news. Did you know, this is interesting, did you know that the CEO of IKEA got elected as the Prime Minister of Sweden?
Is that, wait, whoa, hold on. What, is that true? Or are you BSing me?
This actually happened a couple of weeks ago. Poor guy's still trying to assemble his cabinet.
I'm angry. I'm angry at you. Oh, I fell for that hook, line, and sinker.
Speaking of which, you're building something underneath the stairs right now. Is that not true?
I love how quickly you transition away from that joke. Speaking of getting us off that joke, yes, Brad, I'm building an entirely new podcasting studio underneath my stairs in my Harry Potter closet. And as has been the case with the pandemic, I could do a simple version of it, but I'm running electrical and I'm building tables and I'm cutting wood and sawing things. And I'm going to build a proper little soundstage underneath our stair.
Nice. And that's really, I'm kind of looking forward to that, because now on the show, we'll be doing the show and then it'll be, oh, Gloria's going upstairs. Hold on. Now Gloria's coming downstairs. Are you going to have like a chain in front of the stairs so nobody walks on the stairs?
Well, you know what's funny? This was everybody's response in the family. This is how dumb I am. They're like, well, what about when people go up and down the stairs? And I go, oh, don't worry about it. You guys are all in school when I record the podcast with Brad. And they go, we're out of school for 3 months a year. So I got to tell everybody, for the podcast, there's going to be 3 months with just a in the background.
I was talking about this at the dinner table, and we were talking about your podcast area, and I go, I'm kind of concerned that we're going to hear people walking up the stairs, and Alex, my son, goes, have you said anything? And I said, no, I'll talk about it later, I guess, if we start hearing noises. And he goes, oh, you're just like the smoke detector that goes off after the house burned down.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, one of the last clearly recorded shows before I moved to the new podcast space, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics.
Oh, there goes my dog. There goes my 14-pound dog.
And I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, who half thinks through ideas, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon, and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our ComicLab Live Gab pals. And that's over at patreon.com/ComicLab. You can join us at the $10 level and get the live visually streaming show, not just audio, but visually streaming show every week at the same time. And if you happen to miss the installment, you can check out the archives, which are saved week to week, and you can jump in and watch Brad's visuals. For example, Brad is wearing a cardigan sweater today that I can only say is Mr. Rogers-esque in terms of just the sex appeal of a middle-aged man in a cardigan. I think form an orderly line, everybody. Gentlemen, ladies, let's make this orderly.
Yeah, listen, I look great in this. I'm telling you, this is a good look for me. It's getting harder and harder to find good looks, and this is one of them.
It's professorial. I will give you that. It's got a clean line. It hangs off the shoulder well. Listen to me. You look great, Brad. You look sharp.
All I need is little elbow patches. Remember the college professors that always had elbow patches on their tweed jackets?
That is a great idea if you never want to have sex again in your life. That's great. Yes, let's go with the leather elbow patches. Yes, I think you can seal that deal.
Well, listen, while I'm sealing deals with my cardigan, I want to talk about a deal that you definitely want to keep on your calendar, and that is the Comic Craft January 1st New Year's Day sale at comicbookfonts.com.
It is absolutely one of the things that Brad and I look forward to every year. I say this without hesitation. Every year, I drop so much delighted cash at Comic Craft at their New Year's sale, because they literally make the best fonts in the world of comics. And I have slowly but surely built up an amazing collection of Comic Craft fonts. Ones that I love. I love Comic Crazy, their font Comic Crazy. I love Monologus, Pulp Fiction, Rasm Frasm, Says You, Spills. is one of the best 1950s diner sign fonts I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Cheese and crackers. Brad, what are some of your favorite ComicCraft fonts?
I've got a lot. And because each of these fonts are going to be priced based on the new year. In other words, each of them are going to be $20.22, which is kind of amazing because some of them are quite a bit more expensive than that the rest of the year long. This is the time to stock up. I'll tell you what's on my list. Always, I'm going to suggest Rat-a-tat-tat. This is all-purpose.
You love that one. You love Rat-a-tat-tat.
I use it at least once or twice a week for sound effects. Why? Because it's clear, it's crisp, it's bold, it's beautiful. This is a great font for making sound effects. Particularly, here's another one that I use again at least 3 times a week. It's called Zoinks. Do you use Zoinks?
No, but you know what's funny? This is how you know you've been in the game. I see you using Zoinks, and I go, "All right, Brad, I see you. I know what you're doing."
Zoinks is another good one for sound effects because it's got such a great shape. The sound looks funny when you use Zoinks. It looks funnier than I wrote it.
The energy, yeah. Well, that's the thing. So all of ComicCraft's fonts, by the way, are designed by professionals that are in the comics trade. And so these are not fonts that it might be useful to comics. They specifically have body fonts that are perfect for monologuing. They have sound effects fonts. They have body fonts that are great. And so the entire lineup, and at $20.22 this year, that is fantastic. These are fonts that sometimes go for $150, $200, $400, and all drop down to $20.22. So head on over to ComicCraft on New Year's Day.
And you can check that out at comicbookfonts.com.
May get on your calendar. And Bradley, what is our first topic for today, my friend?
Oh, we've got a great topic for today. This one comes in from Katie McMahon, who says, "Hey, Dave and Brad, I'd love some advice on editing comic pages. I'm fairly confident with editing on the writing side of making comics, but I don't have a good framework for how to edit on the art side. If you have any resources you'd recommend looking into, I'd appreciate it." So we're going to talk about, I guess maybe the better word for this is art direction, art editing. How would you suggest somebody edit the art in a comics project?
Okay, well, this is a great question, and I don't know that we've ever really talked about this in depth before. So let's jump in on it. I think there's a couple things to establish that you can do on any given panel to help emphasize and work with and play off of the writing that you're presenting in that panel, right? So number one is camera choice, camera angle. Do you have a tight shot from below, which makes it look like a socialist realist hero shot, like Superman, broad chest looking upward kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Do you have bird's eye view looking down, sort of indicating that in this moment, this person feels alone on even among a busy street there, it's a God's eye view of an individual, alone. Do you have an up close tight shot? Sort of all the 22 panels that work from Wally Wood. All of those can help emphasize and help select the mood that you're trying to present in the panel. Second one, I think, is lighting. This one goes unsaid a lot, but I often light for room medium, sort of like I tend to let my writing do the heavy lifting, but there are cartoonists I'm thinking like Paul Pope that use lighting to great effect in terms of going dark and emphasizing with light. The other one, the final one that I would say is the editing of materials, backgrounds, and items that you have in frame. A classic idea is the idea of, Chekhov's gun. You don't want to have more stuff than needed. You don't want to. We work and live in a reductive art, so you want to winnow down to what is the bare essence, enough to set the mood, enough to help reinforce what the point of that scene is or the point of that dialogue is, but not to distract, so that people are like, wait, I see why Batman is mad at the Flash, but why is there a porpoise on a rock in the background? Like, why did they choose to? Does the porpoise mean something? I don't know what the porpoise is all about.
Was that a mistake, or did they do it on purpose? Is what you're trying to ask?
Oh my God! I walked right into that. So those are my three off the cuff thoughts, Brad, on how to edit for art. such that your art and your writing are working hand in glove. What are your thoughts, Brad? You seem to be fired up over there, so I want to know what you...
I am a little bit. I'm finding out I have more and more Niagara Falls topics that come up, those topics.
Okay, wait, can I pause you for a second? For our international friends, can you explain what Niagara Falls is? Because we use that reference a lot, and I don't know that everyone knows that.
There was a great vaudeville routine that the Three Stooges made famous, where basically somebody comes up and says a phrase that sets off this other person into a furious, violent fit of punches and kicks. And that phrase is Niagara Falls. And whenever somebody says Niagara Falls, this huge, usually it's a huge actor, right? A huge guy bellows, "Slowly I turned, step by step, inch by inch," and then pummels the person mercilessly until the next time they say Niagara Falls, and the guy says, "Niagara Falls, slowly I turned." So this is another one of my Niagara Falls topics. And I'm going to tell you why, just because I need to preface this, because if I just give you my advice, it's going to sound really mean. So I'm going to give you where this is coming from, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts, okay?
Okay.
I spent 20 years in newspapers being art directed by people who never bothered to learn anything about visual design. Because of how the hierarchies of newspapers were, writers went up the ladders. Writers became editors. They became managing editors. They became editors in chief. They made all of the decisions. Artists and photographers could become people in charge of the art department and the photo department, and that's about as far as they got. All right? So when it came down to a decision of presenting a visual, I was always being vetoed by people who had absolutely no idea about visual design, about art elements, about the craft that I had been pursuing for the past several decades. Okay. Right. And so time and time again, as I was doing either a page design, an illustration, or an informational graphic, people would tell me to do things that I really felt were bad decisions, but I had to do them because they had decision-making power. That's my Niagara Falls on this. That's why if you're going to tell me that you're making art editing decisions and you don't know anything about art, I'm going to ask you very kindly to stay out of it. I don't think you should be making art editing decisions. If you don't know anything about art, you should leave that to the people who have been practicing their craft. If you know more about writing, you should make writing editing decisions, and you should stay out of art editing decisions and let the people who live and breathe that craft make those decisions. I think, in my opinion, you're going to get better decision making that way.
Oh, I don't necessarily disagree with you. However, this is how the question and interchange kind of appeared to me. This is you'll know when Brad Geiger comes into this this answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Brad, it's Bob Skivens writing a real quick question. Do you prefer Ford or Chevy cars? And then Brad goes, well, I'll tell you what, Bob, I hate motorcycles. And anybody who rides a motorcycle is a son of a bitch. And I don't know why you're asking me about motorcycles. Now, why did you get the sense that this question asker was asking about art directing someone else and not their own work was my takeaway.
Oh, that's a really good, you know what? I stand accused, and rightly so. If you're talking about your own, well, but wait a minute. If you're an artist, I gotta sit with that for a second, because when I read that, I really did assume they were talking about being part of a collaboration, a part of a team, and they didn't know how to edit that in the process. Because if you're an artist, I think editing is something that comes up that you learn how to do as you're learning your craft.
Right.
But that doesn't mean, by the way, if you're right on this, that doesn't mean that Katie should feel bad about asking the question. It just means that we need to rephrase how we're thinking about that.
Let's do this. Why don't we answer it both ways? Because both are helpful answers. I will echo with Brad's statement that if you are on a team, if you are the writer and your artist is making choices that maybe you don't agree with, It is dangerous waters to start swimming out to give them art direction if you yourself are not understanding the reasons why they might have made certain art direction choices, things like that. For example, Beth, the colorist on Sheldon and Drive, I'm colorblind, Brad, and every once in a while she will make a choice, and I know that it's dangerous waters when I start commenting on someone who's a specialist in color. And I, for the most part, if I'm going to dip a toe into the water of critique or noting, I'm like, now, Beth, am I right in saying that the color I'm seeing here is a yellow? Okay, great. Yes. So it's a yellow. So we're going to move on from that. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't come in guns blazes like, I don't like this yellow, because then she goes, Dave, that's a green. You're not even seeing the right color. And so there's a version of what you're saying here, which is don't come in guns blazing on a topic for which you don't know much. So I think you and I can agree there. But I think what I read this question, Brad, as saying, hey, I would like to improve my editorial eye for art making, for how I construct a panel, for how I construct a page. How would you, Brad, tell an artist who is on the path of art making to get better at their editorial decisions around their art construction of their page and their panels?
If that's the case, then I agree with you step after step. Everything you said, I agree with. And I'll just add this. First, I'll just add, Katie, I'm terribly sorry. If that's the case, then I'm really glad that I gave you my preview before I just jumped into it, because it would have been horrible if I would have just said, "Hey, Katie, just stay out of it. You don't belong in there." So I will say I'm going to add this to what Dave said, and that is, in all cases, you're looking for clarity, and here's what I mean. Yes. So many times as comics artists, we, as an attempt to kind of flex our muscles and show, our drawing skills and stuff, we can make some really bad compositional decisions. And I guess for me, that's might be where I took a fork in the road, because a lot of the things that are coming to mind right now are composition related, and I wouldn't consider them editing. But I see where we're getting the connection here, and I get it. Make sure that clarity is your number one. And by the way, the next thing that I'm going to say, out of all of it, your word balloons are the most important part. So many times I see people trying to do a really beautiful illustration and then shoehorn the word balloons in wherever they fit. And of course, that's a wonderful way to write a comic that gets read in the wrong order. Right?
Yes.
So I want you to really concentrate on, even though it might be a little bit boring, I want you to always concentrate on having the first word balloon in the upper left corner every time. You know why? Because that's where your readers are looking for it, right? And that's what I mean by going for clarity. Sometimes sacrificing a little bit in the illustration in order to get those word balloons to happen in the right order, because it's the reading experience that is the most important out of everything. So then once you get that in the upper left-hand corner, make sure that you're composing those word balloons in a Z pattern, right? You start at the upper left, you go straight across, and then if you have more, you go diagonal down to the left and then across to the right. It's a Z pattern. There's a lot of people that want to float these word balloons just wherever they think it'll fit in the illustration, and their comics get read in the wrong order. So my keyword here, if you're looking to edit your art, is clarity. Make sure you're making that scene, you're composing that panel with ultimate clarity in mind.
Well, and I will say one other thing too, is that as you're editing through your art, one thing that you will find is that most of us, 99% of us, start from a writing perspective. I mean, I know Stan Lee and Kirby figured out some weird ass technique where they would draw it and then Stan would fill in the word blue. Just weird. But most of us start from writing. And so what art editing allows you to do is you can isolate a lot of moments where the art can do the heavy lifting such that you can remove 10%, 20%, 30% of your text. You know what I mean? If you can impart the mood, the tone, the tenor through the art, far better than the words, then do that. That is a good choice. It is better as a reductive art. It's better to let the art do the heavy lifting than the text. So I know that this was specifically an art question, but you can continue to edit even in the art making process of your thumbnailing. I guess that's when you mail a thumb. Is that you're now working for the mob? Look, we're thumbnailing over here. What are you doing? No, your thumbnailing and your panel layout. You can, by virtue of going, oh, wait a minute, I can show this mood rather than saying I am sad. How much better to show the pathos in their face than to have extraneous words. So anyway, Katie, so a couple of things. Per Brad's notes, don't you dare ride a motorcycle. Ford and Chevy are perfectly fine cars.
Stay off of those motorcycles, Katie. They're no good.
Speaking of which, I should give you one fun bit of news because you were mentioning that the graphics folks never rise up the ranks of newspapers. One thing I should mention, only because he's an old college friend of mine, we were both cartoonists at Notre Dame, and the New York Times made Steve Duenas, who's one of their graphic artists and occasional illustrator cartoonist, they made them deputy. He's now deputy managing editor, which is one of the reasons I think why the New York Times has such great graphics displays, great the award-winning, Pulitzer-winning maps and graphs and stuff. And a lot of that is Steve's work. And even though I haven't talked to Steve in 15 years now, I'm really proud of him that he got to deputy managing editor of the New York Times all through the graphics, not the writing side of things, but the graphic side of things. As a cartoonist, that's exciting.
Which is super significant.
Yeah. So anyway, so as a cartoonist, you can even work your way up the traditional press ladders. So that's exciting.
And that's wonderful.
But anyway, Katie, I think we were able to manage your question and work in an oblique Brad rant there on the side. So I think you got a twofer. You got a twofer on that one.
Got a twofer Tuesday. Well,
That's
listen,
right.
Dave, we've got another question, and we're going to go from art into writing. Listen to this. This one comes in from Brandon Heyman, who asks, hey, guys, in a recent episode, Brad went into detail about his entire writing process, but after reading both Drive books, I find that my own writing style is more akin to Dave's and how he meanders for a bit as the story unfolds. So, Dave, could you do a deep dive on your writing process and explain more of how and why it works for you and for the comic?
I know. Maybe that was an accidental word choice. The meandering made me laugh a little bit. Like Dave's writing, which is much like a 95-year-old grandparent who's been let out of the yard, and now the whole family has to go look on Thanksgiving for where they ended up.
Yeah. Now, just to recap, a lot of my advice during that talk was you've got to move from story beat to story beat. You've got to plan your story. You've got to get to the point. There's got to be significant moments. And Dave, evidently, what you do is much akin to Billy or Jeffy on the Family Circus. You just have that dotted line that goes all over the yard as you're trying to find a point somewhere. Maybe someday you'll get to it. So, Dave, explain to Brandon this meandering that you're doing.
I'm like Billy following a helium balloon around the neighborhood as it bounces around. So no, I guess. Brandon, all joking aside, I'm not insulted, and I know what you mean about meandering, because here's what I do. My strategy, and we've talked about this on the show before, but my strategy is I know where I'm going. I know where my goal is. I'm driving from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, right? And I know that I'm going to end up in Philadelphia. I know how I'm going to get there. I know what the mood is when I arrive, right? But I also know that on my way to Philadelphia, I'm going to stop at Denver. I'm going to stop in Kansas City. I'm going to stop in Chicago, and then on to Philadelphia. By the way, that road trip makes no sense. I don't know why you would go Denver, Kansas. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is I know all those major stops along the way, but I don't know what diner I'm going to stop at on day 4. Mm-hmm. I allow myself a little wiggle room for fun, happy discoveries along the way. Phrases that a character says, turns of plot that could not change things, but enhance things along the way. So not everything is fully plotted out, to answer your question, which I think, being kind about it, I think that's what you're getting at, in the sense that you can tell that not everything is plotted down to every T being crossed and I being dotted. But I personally think that allows for a little bit of naturalism in how life unfolds in roller coaster fashion. It's not always a constant climb up or a constant drop down. It's an up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And also it makes it more fun for me along the way. So is it meandering? I hope it's not too meandering, but I somewhat take your meaning in that I don't have like a fixed goal that I'm headed to and got to get there super fast, right?
Well, now, with that being said, do you want to go into detail about your writing process? Because when I remember that show, I basically said, here's where the idea is, here's how I get it to the next step, and then I go to an editing process. How much detail are you comfortable going into about your own writing process, starting from the germ of the idea all the way through?
Sure. Well, I think one helpful way to talk about it is how I do an individual page. So I will, when I sit down in my writing chair with a little cup of coffee and my dog on my lap, and I will have a pad of paper. And for whatever reason, Drive, I like the pad of paper because anything that I cross out, anything that I X through is still on that page. If I type it and I delete it, it is gone. And you might think, well, no problem with that. But 45 minutes on in my writing process, I might go, wait. I had a better version of this phrase 45 minutes ago. What was it I said under this scratch marks? And, you can still read under your scratch marks. And you go, oh, yeah, that was a better phrase. I'm going to rework that back in. And so for me, something about the physical media of having it in pen and on paper, where there's scratch outs, there's arrows, like bringing panel 3 up to panel 1, moving this section of panel 1 down to panel 4.
Yes.
Something about the kineticism about that, about the captured memory, even though it's crossed out, is helpful. So that's how I do that. But then what I do with each page of Drive is I say to myself, even though it's not like a spoken thing at this point, it's just intuitive. I say, I know I need to get out 2 bits of information on this page. They've been given a command to go to this planet, right? That has to get out on this page. And before they do that, they have to charge the weapons, right? Those are the 2 exponential in storytelling terms, in terms of laying the pipe. That's the exponential, not the exponential. That's the expositional stuff that has to get out. But around that, what I try to do is to disguise the fact that you've just learned 2 new things that are critical to the story. Yeah. And so I let it sit amongst other day-to-day conversation, among jokes, among other character building moments, so that you don't consciously go, I see what Dave is doing. He is telling us we need to go to the planet. Like, it's not roboticized. You know what I mean? Right. Because I want it to feel organic, that this came up in conversation and now they have to go do this thing. So there's that. And then to Brad's often repeated point, I really try to end every page of Drive on some satisfying ending, because Drive updates on a 1 page per week basis. So it's either most often it's a joke, right? It's some kind of build and then a popping of the balloon joke kind of a feeling, right? Or it's a really critical character moment, a big character reaction, a big mood, whatever that mood might be, sadness, excitement, anger, whatever that mood could be, or it's something big visually, an explosion, someone breaks out of a jail, whatever it is that basically it's a satisfying ending. So you get to the end of the page and you go, well, that wasn't worth it. You go, oh, that was worth it. That was a satisfying read, Brad. How about you? How do you tackle a page? Now, I know you come at it more structured. You're less like a 4-year-old like I am, meandering through a forest trying to recapture where their parents set up camp. That's apparently me on my writing style. But now talk to me about your writing style, Brad, about how you do it.
I'm going to underline everything that you said, because everything that you said dovetails very, very closely with what I do. I'm just going to add one thing, and that is making sure that I'm thinking about my individual pages as they're going to appear in social media, because I'm using social media and my website as audience building, reader retention tools. And so I'm going to make sure that there's a place in every one of those social media posts that has an entry point for somebody that's just coming to this for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
So that they can,
good point.
So they can kind of jump in. I'm not throwing somebody in cold. And that means you've got to write this stuff with that in mind. In the first swing, you've got to write these pages with the thought of, okay, how's this going to look on social media? How's this going to look on my website for that person that's coming to the website for the first time? You can't do it every time. You can't do it every time.
And Brad, before you go on, the most hacky version of that, just to clarify what Brad does versus the most hacky version of that, the most hacky version of that is actually the Spider-Man comic strip, if you've ever seen it. Which is notorious for the first panel is a bad recap of whatever has been going on.
Yeah.
The middle panel moves the exposition 1/8 of an inch forward. And then the third panel is like, I don't know, we'll see more tomorrow. And then the next day is the exact same pattern. That's the hack. But what Brad is saying is 1/100th of that, where you give just enough of a mood, a sense, a resonance. Like, we're not catching you up, but you kind of are not being thrown in cold, right, Brad? Isn't that a good way to describe that?
Well, yeah. In other words, what you just described, like you said, 1/100th. In other words, that Spider-Man pattern where the first panel is a recap. Well, okay, recap. Take that out and replace it with entry point, right? Because recap is a great, again, this was a factory style of doing storytelling with that comic strip, right? They had to have certain rules that whoever they throw into that, they could follow those rules. Recap, story, foreshadowing. Boom, boom, boom. Follow these rules. Well, okay, take recap out, put in entry point. Now, instead of having a 3-panel comic, that's one of the reasons that I rethought my comic away from a comic strip and towards a graphic novel, and rethought my pages as basically a top half and a bottom half. Each of those are a separate social media post.
Right.
I gave myself more panels, in other words, okay? Which you could do. You could do the same thing with something that is published like Drive, where you're publishing a page and it's closer to 6 panels. You could do the same thing, but give yourself an entry point. Now do the storytelling. This is the fun part. And then that last panel, something has to happen. You've got to make that reading experience significant for everybody, the longtime readers and the people that came for the first time. Okay. And that's like I said, it's hard to do. It can be done. It's hard to do. And sometimes every now and again, I'll put out a social media post where I just know, you know what, this was important to do for the book. It's not going to do great on social media. I'm not going to gain readers today. Today is not going to be a reader gaining day. But it's necessary for the book. And so you sit there and you make a decision of balance. Where's my balance? You say, okay, it needs to be done. And boom, you hit the button and out it goes. Knowing full well that if you keep making that same decision over and over and over again, it's going to have a cumulative effect on your audience building, reader retention process, right? I tell myself, okay, you can do this every now and again, Brad. You can't do it all the time. You got to get back to making something happen on that post, or else you're not going to build readers. So it's a question of balance.
Well, and speaking of balance, I should mention too that 99% of my pages, and I'm sure this is true with Brad, I have the 1 or 2 bits of exposition that I know I need to get out, but they're satisfying and they make sense within the context of the story as it's unfolding. But on every, say, 100th page, I have some bit of foreshadowing or some bit of exposition that comes out of left field that is frankly going to confuse people. But to Brad's point about the book, you have to put those markers down so that there's a benefit 100 pages from now. And so even though on those days you a little bit lose/confuse people because they're like, wait, what is this? What is it? Who are we foreshadowing here? Or what's going on? Or what's this new bit of exposition? Yes, you'll lose people on that day, or yes, you'll confuse people, or yes, that's not a growing day for you in terms of people sharing it with friends. But those days are very important for the overall arcing of the story. And so you have to allow for those days, 1 out of 100 pages or so, to just lay down the markers of either foreshadowing or a new plot twist or a character development that no one saw coming. Those are important too. And so even though, unlike Brad's tight writing style, even though I'm more like a baby duck that's been separated from the mommy mallard and I'm wandering the pond, quacking, looking for her, I think a meandering style, I don't know, Brad, I'm just joking, by the way. I'm not that offended by it. Even though a more meandering style is not as tight, it can be very satisfying if you will follow still certain rules of satisfying ending, of getting out exposition a little bit on every page, either a character development or an expositional build, and then making sure you hit those major landmarks of Phoenix, Kansas City, Chicago on your way to Philadelphia, then you can absolutely build a satisfying story while still allowing for some wiggle room on the way there.
As long as you get to Philadelphia, that's all I care about. Just end up in Philadelphia.
I would like to rescind that city and change it to New York.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Well, Brad, before we jump into part 2 of the show, I think everybody is still on pins and needles about Crow Watch 2021. How are the crows doing? How are your friendships going with the crows? What's going on with the crows? What shiny objects have you been offering? How are things with the crows?
It's been a really tough November, I've got to tell you. The crows are still not coming, and a lot of my little aluminum figures have gotten blown off the deck, so I've had to go into neighbors' alleys and pick little tinfoil squirrels up and get them back. It's been a little bit difficult right now. I'm at a low place right now in my crow friendship. I got to be honest with you.
Brad, you want to be soaring with the eagles and quite literally soaring with the crows, and you're at a low place.
Yeah.
So, well, hold on. I just want to make absolutely clear what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
You, a grown, sentient human being,
Yes,
trying to make friends with a less intelligent avian bird.
Crows are very intelligent.
They're very intelligent. They're not as, I would hope, Brad, that they're not as smart as you. I'm just trying to clarify what's happening here. If you're trying to argue that your crow friends are as smart as you, we're going to pause the show for a minute, and you and I are going to start a separate phone call real quick. All right. So you, a sentient, intelligent adult human,
Yes.
are trying to make friends with a small 2-pound black bird, right? That you are, that occasionally lands on your porch
And brings you things.
And I think it's safe to say it's not going well, is what I'm hearing.
No, well, don't rub it in. I mean, it's not. We're not over yet, but we're at a low point right now. That's all I'm willing to say. We're at a low point.
I just want to say, are there any comparisons between this moment in your life right now and your high school career? Any comparisons that you would like to make between right now and high school?
Well, in that the object of my desire is very standoffish and is very likely to poop on me.
And is flying away from you at a moment's notice.
There's a few uncomfortable parallels there.
Well, I for one wish you all the best as Crow Watch 2021 continues.
We're not over yet. You know, it's not done yet. And the good news is the weather is still nice enough for me to take my Wacom One out onto that deck, and that's a nice shiny surface too. And I'm hoping that Wacom One is going to help me turn the corner.
Absolutely. And a well-turned phrase, my friend, that reminds me we need to give a huge shout out and a thank you to our friends at Wacom for sponsoring today's show. Wacom at wacom.com, makers of the Wacom One, which both Brad and I own and use and love in our studios. I use it for Drive on the daily. Brad uses it for Evil Ink on the daily, and also for drawing special pictures for his crow friends.
That's right, I do.
Small portraitures that he holds up, and Mr. Pickles sometimes responds, I think, Brad, sometimes does not, depending on how the crow is feeling.
Depending on how the crow flies, it's been going very, very poorly.
How the crow flies. Do we know if crows can distinguish two-dimensional objects?
I actually don't know. I know they're very smart.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. You're really going to die on this hill about like, now listen, I'm not great at taxes, but I'm really trying to get the crows to help me out here. They're very smart. They're very smart creatures. But anyway, we give a huge shout out and a thank you to our friends Wacom at wacom.com, makers of the Wacom One. And Bradley J, let me jump us into our next question coming in from Mike Benowitz over at patreon.com. /ComicLab. And Mike writes, hey there, you often talk about ways to make social media posts engaging by asking a question or such. I've been struggling for ways to ask an engaging question for my long-form, plot-driven comic when we post single pages. Do you have any ideas how to approach this? It's more complicated than a how does this happen to you type shtick.
Right.
And thanks. I really love the show. I wrote my first original script in 20 years after listening to Writer's Room a few times. I've only done adaptations in the meantime, but now I have an original short story that I can't wait to draw. Thank you. Mike, that's awesome. I'm so glad. And by the way, Writer's Room goes out exclusively to our Patreon members over at patreon.com/ComicLab. So if you want to listen to those, they are delightful and well worth a listen. And Brad, Mike's question, how do you make social media posts engaging without having to ask a question necessarily?
Right. Well, listen, this is a tough one. And I always point people back to that show that we had with Kevin McShane, where he talked about share thoughts, right? Those ideas, like when you make a social media post, you're thinking in your mind, why would somebody share this? And you're trying to kind of engineer it to put that share thought into your post. And one of the many things that he talked about was to ask a question, right? To say, hey, does this, and this is what Mike is saying, does this happen to you, in an attempt to generate some of that engagement and feedback. But that was one of many things that Kevin talked about, right? There was a lot of other things, like you might share something because it has an emotion that you're really having a hard time sharing with other people, or communicating, or communicates a thought that you think is important. Go back and listen to that show. It was quite a while ago. You'll find it in the early episodes of ComicLab. But that has a lot of really good advice for this. But I want to go one more further, especially because it dovetails so nicely with what we just got done talking about. If you're just writing a graphic novel and putting pages up on social media and expecting those pages to get social media engagement, and by the way, this also goes for your website too. In other words, I don't want you to kind of hand wave this because you've heard me say late stage social media and you think it's going to be over in 3 weeks and you don't have to worry about this. This is still very important, and it's important for web publishing in general. But if you're doing a page and you're just thinking about this as a graphic novel, and you're putting those individual pages up on social media, expecting those to get engagement, once you put a couple fancy words on there, you're going to have an uphill climb. Yes. What you really need to be doing as you're writing those pages is to be considering those pages as how they are going to play out in the inevitable social media post. And that goes back to what we just got done talking about, having an entry point, having a significant thing happen. I'll give you an example. If you've got something, let's say on page 3, where the first word balloon is, that seems to be the case, right? Well, what just happened there? I don't know. That's not a good entry. I don't know what's going on. If I go back and read page 2, the last thing that was said on page 2 is, well, it seems that John is the murderer, right? That's a pretty good way to end page 2, but that seems to be the case. I don't know where that's coming from, right?
The jumping in point is not so clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're continuing thoughts from page to page that I have to read the previous page to understand, that's not going to work so well on social media. So part of the job is not just learning how to apply Kevin McShane's share thoughts in a post. Part of the job starts on day 1 when you're writing this thing, and breaking those pages up, finding those moments so that you can engineer that social media friendly post as you're writing that page. You just don't have the luxury of just doing a graphic novel and posting it page by page. That's not the world you're living in, especially if you're trying to build a readership and get your audience up there. You've got to be building this in as you're in the writing process.
Yeah, I think. By the way, Brad, you're right on the mark with this one in terms of having it be from the moment of writing the comic itself, not from the social media post. Really, I honestly think this goes back as far as to step number 1 in our 20 comic commandment, which is make a good comic.
Yeah,
because long form is one of those things where even though I personally feel like you get less new people coming in, I do feel like you have a better chance of permanently hooking them, not just casually hooking them, if it is a good comic. And so one of the ways that you make your social media work for you with long form is that the comic is so good that their friends are tagging other friends in social media saying, hey, here's a good example of that story I was telling you about. You will like this. And there's enough of them in that particular page that they want to share it with their friends. But it's also built upon a foundation of being a good story, which is really critical. And honestly, to Kevin McShane's point about people share a thing that in some way echoes who they are. It's almost a statement about their personality, right? So it's kind of like a T-shirt that, I don't know, name whatever T-shirt slogan you would want to have.
I love New York.
I love New York, right? If someone in Kansas wears an I love New York shirt, they're making a statement about the aspirations, the desires, where they truly want to be in the world, that they see their vistas as being broader than just Kansas. They want to get to New York, that kind of thing, right? So they're making a statement about themselves with the shirt. And whenever you post on social media, you'll see this kind of comment a lot. Jokingly, you'll see people say, like, I see myself in this comic and I don't like it. Like, or who set up the camera in my house? Or they'll say things like, where
are my crow friends?
Right. Or me, that kind of, some version of basically, I see myself in this comic.
Yeah.
And so that happens even with long form. And when you get those moments and it's built on a foundation of good story, you'll see people sharing it because it relates permanently to who their self-identity is. And so they will share it because they'll be like, this is a worldview that I share. This is a worldview that reflects me. I'm going to put it out into social media.
Absolutely. And remember, you do have the wherewithal in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, you have the wherewithal that if you have one of those pages, that's kind of a page that isn't going to perform well on social media, to make your social media post 2 pages at a time. Right. So you can build a larger moment to really hit something significant. You're not locked in again. And I've been saying this almost since the beginning of the show. If you're publishing webcomics the way we did in 2005, you're missing a lot. And that's the way we did long form in 2005. You did a page, you posted a page. You did page 2, you posted page 2, right? You have to use some strategy in doing this now. You don't have... And by the way, between you and me, I don't think that was ever a very good way of publishing a long form on the web. But if you are in that situation, you have to remember, hey, maybe this is the week I post 2 pages instead of 1 page.
Yeah. And I will say, Brad's 1,000% right. There are more than a few occasions where I will do a 2-up or a 3-up on social media, 3-up pages, because for a billion reasons, that single standalone page, even though it will work in the book, it doesn't really work on social media, or it doesn't really work as an update. So I will basically go to town that week and produce 2 to 3 pages instead of producing 1 page, because it's not worth updating people with just 1 page that week. So Brad is definitely on the mark on that one. And so good luck with that one, Mike. I think you're on the right path in asking that question.
Well, here's a question, Dave, as we wrap that up, that is a little bit more sobering. And it's something that many of us in self-publishing are experiencing. The question comes from Mindy Indy, and it says, with printers backed up, my comic won't be printed until at least January. While there's nothing that can be done to speed it up, how can I and others make the best of a January or February release? When everyone is tapped out from the holidays, early year releases are tough. So, Dave, there's a few of us that are going to be in the situation of having a book that we planned for late 2021 coming out in early 2022 in those sleepy months of January and February and even March. What do you do about this? How do you fight that malaise?
Well, if you're Dave Kellett, you have a lot of sleepless nights. That's what you do, Brad. For everyone that remembers, I kickstarted a drive book, the third drive book, a few months back, hoping that it would be available at the end of 2021. However, I set my delivery date at March 2022 because I knew even 6 months ago, I could see the signs that the paper supplies, the longboats off of the western coast of the United States, the trucking problems that Britain was having. I was like, I can just see where this is headed. Yeah. And even though the pandemic might be winding down, knock on wood, that there are still supply side and logistics problems across the world right now because of death and because of illness and because of weird buying patterns. So this is affecting all of us. In fact, it's even affecting Image Comics, who this week, Brad, announced that they are not going to be doing second printings of their books anymore, at least for the foreseeable future, because the economics and the logistics just don't work out right now. So, and it's also a problem in Europe right now, which has literally run out of paper to print books. I think there's 4 major printers in Europe now still. And there was a tweet that went massively viral the other day because they literally ran out of paper in Europe until the beginning of the new year. There's 2 printers in the U.S. of size, both of which are having problems getting paper from Canada right now, which is still the big supplier for the U.S. of paper. And then for those of printing in China and India, all sorts of logistics problems in getting those boats over here and getting them successfully unloaded. So there's problems all over. So this is a universal question. And here is the good news. I hope that you are not just printing these books without having kickstarted them first, because when you kickstart, you lock in that customer way earlier. They're also helping to help you plan how many to print, and they're underwriting the cost of the printing. So you've locked in the customers, you've got a better idea of how many to print, and you've got the money to make the book. So hopefully you've done that. If you haven't, it's still not ruinous to have a book in the new year, even though it's not ideal. And here's why. You've been building your customer base for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, hopefully such to the point that they are excited about this book coming out no matter when it comes out. So it's not like you are trying to go find a customer in January, February. You're just trying to get an existing customer to say, yes, I'm excited for this book. I'm ready to buy in.
Yep. And that's really is the strength of the publishing methods that Dave and I talk about on this show week after week. And this is why you're doing all that stuff. Everything that we just got done talking about, the importance of social media, planning for social media, every darn topic that we've had, all going back to art and writing, leads you to this point. And now you hopefully have a dedicated audience. You've got a readership that you've built up. And it doesn't matter to them that it's January, because remember, a part of this, you've got to break yourself out of that mindset of the publishing industry that hopefully you're not part of, right? And when I say hopefully, if you're working with a publisher for this, well, then this is partially the publisher's nut to crack. Right. This is why they get their take of the book sale.
Let them figure it out, basically, is what you're saying.
This is their job to do. But if you're somebody that's self-publishing like Dave and I, sometimes it's easy to think along those terms that you said. Well, geez, January and February, those are slow months. They are for retailers. They absolutely are. But if you're doing self-publishing the way we're talking about it, you're not relying on somebody standing there at Barnes and Nobles, for example, making a point of sale decision. You're not deciding. Not. This is not an impulse buy. This is somebody that's been following you for a long time. And okay, it's January. I don't care. It's January, and Mindy has a book. I love Mindy. I want that book. Right. January doesn't enter into that equation. You're not relying on point of sale decision making. This is where all the work that you've been doing up until now on social media, all those dumb tweets, all that thought that you put into this, all of this stuff that you've done, all of that community building that hopefully you've been doing up until this point. This is where it all pays off. Right. And that when you say now that you've got a book, nobody looks at their calendar. They are excited for you and your new book.
Right. This is when the rubber hits the road as far as having used the 4 C's of social media for the past 2, 3, 4 years. Because you have built up an audience such that they pay attention to your announcements. They pay attention to you. They want to know when the book is coming, and they're excited for it. And also remember, there is also a long game aspect to this that even printers and publishers don't have, that you have as an independent creator. And I'll tell you what I mean. Back in the day, in like grad school, I worked at a bookstore, and it was amazing to me the amount and the volume of books that would get pulped, because once they had reached a certain sort of expiration date, Brad, we would get a notice from the publisher saying, return the cover, and you literally tore the cover off the book and throw the rest of the book away, because they knew that if it hadn't sold by X number of months after it's launched, that only a percentage would continue to sell. And so pulp the rest, send us back the covers so you can get reimbursed. And then that was that, right? They had a model, but here's the thing. Mindy, in these cases, we don't have that same model. We can play the long game where I can continue to sell a book that I have. And granted, I only have about 30 of them left in my archive that I printed 14 years ago. I'm still selling that one, Brad. Yeah. And it's still bringing me value even after the cost of goods sold is long since recouped on that, decades ago, right? And so that's part of my business model, is that, yes, of course, I want to push those sales in those first months when the book launches, because if I didn't Kickstart, I sure as heck want to recoup my costs as quickly as possible, right? But even if that's not the case, it's still the long game in a way that we have that publishers and printers don't have. Image won't hold on to certain books as long as we will hold on to them. DC and Marvel won't hold on to them as long as we will hold on to them. So we have a certain home field advantage in terms of being the owners and operators of our own online stores that other people do not have.
Absolutely. Dave, if you'd like, we've got time for one more question as we're nearing the end of the show, and it's one that you are in a unique place to answer. This one comes in from our friend Nathan, who says, this one's for Dave. He's mentioned a few times on the show that he studied historical comics in the United Kingdom. I was wondering if he had any Victorian or Platinum Age comics that he found particularly interesting or entertaining, or would otherwise recommend aspiring comics historians check out. Follow up: any resources he thinks comics historians interested in this area should check out? So let's talk about your study over there in the UK. Other than learning how to use that train system efficiently, what can you tell us about where we should be looking for the bright spots in comics history there?
Oh my God, you saying the train system just reminded me of, can I tell you a brief train story about the UK?
Please.
I don't know if the English still have this, but there was a train that went from London down to Canterbury, where I lived. And a friend of mine from LA flew out to London to come visit and stay with me. And her train pulls up into Canterbury. But here was the weird thing about this train, and I do not know why the English designed it this way. You had to roll down the window at the door, reach out outside, turn the knob, and open the door, right?
Oh, my goodness.
It was a train, I think, from the late 60s, 70s, but it was still on the tracks when I was in England. I'm sure it's gone by now. But anyway, everybody in England, because you grew up with it, you knew how this train door worked. But every American or Canadian that got on this train was like, So my friend, who was not shy, and she had a very American accent, she the window is open at the train station. Her train pulls up at Canterbury, and there's, you have what on average 2 minutes, 3 minutes to get off a train, and so she had a couple minutes, but she couldn't figure out how to get the door open. She leans out the door and screams in the loudest American accent. And if you know the English, they're not really big on like making a show of yourself. She's screaming, "Someone help me! I don't know how to get the door open! Oh God, someone help!" And I was like, oh my God. So I'm running across the station like, shut up, all over the door, shut up. Stop being an American. But to be fair, it was the most ridiculous door. I don't remember the name of the manufacturer, but anyway, it was So Nathan, to your question. I don't remember
the name of the manufacturer. That's the most Dave Kellett thing you've said all day.
So as far as Victorian or let's broaden that out for the 40, 50 years around Victorian age cartooning. Here is the truth. For whatever reason, subjectively, I find that period to be kind of uninteresting.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I mean, you look at the first burst of comics in English, and you've got Hogarth and you've got Gilray, and it's around 1746 to around 1780. There's this real explosion of them figuring shit out. Like they're figuring out how a word balloon works. And remember, Brad, they had it touch the lip of the person. So the word balloon would come down in a super long, almost spaghetti-like tail, and it would kind of awkwardly touch their lip. And the words would flow as though they were kind of drunk. They hadn't figured out yet that strongly horizontal lines were the best way to present that, right? They were still figuring it out. And yet, because they were all classically trained artists and the etchings were amazing, all the etch work was beautiful. They were hand colored and sold as folios. And so it was really interesting, right? And then comics, in my mind, kind of meandered for the next 100, 150 years because people were still kind of figuring it out. And really, until print got to a certain point of affordability, you didn't have an explosion. And yes, Punch existed. And yes, in America, you had other publications. But I think aside from certain bursts of interesting cartoonists like Thomas Nast or in Britain, you'd have, I'm trying to even think, but it wasn't really the high point. It's like saying, hey, Brad, tell me about the best moments of your early dating career. You're like, no, it wasn't great. I was still figuring out how to date. I was still figuring out how to be me, you know?
You had moments. I didn't even have moments. I was jealous of anybody that had moments.
Yeah, I'm kind of saying this as a cartoon historian. I personally feel like there's about a 50 to 80 year window there where it's kind of like the teen years of cartooning. Like, yes, you would get interesting sparks of like, oh, someone had an innovation here or someone figured it out here. But I honestly, and David Malky said this in Stripped, and I think it was to great effect. When photography came along, it almost immediately within a 10-year period wiped out an entire class of illustrators. And so you had a lot of people transitioning to comics. And at that point, you had really some interesting experimentation done because they were basically much like Picasso was trying to separate painting from what film could do and what photography could do. You had cartoonists trying to separate what cartooning could do to separate it from photography. Like, look what we can do that photography can't do, right? And that was caricature. That was long form storylines that photographs couldn't do. And so you had things like comics. So when the comic strip started to come along in Germany and in the US and in a little bit lesser extent in Britain, you had really interesting experimentation. And so you had stuff like Katzenjammer Kids and all that sort of stuff. And that's, I think, when things really pick up and start to spark. So for me, Victorian age is kind of boring teen years. Yes, there's a little bit of experimentation and some fun stuff, but it's not sexy or exciting to me.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I was wondering the same thing. It's funny you mentioned the word balloons that touch the lip of the person. If you've ever seen a friend of mine from the Ohio area, John Backdurf, who just goes by Durf, who is a wonderful alt editorial cartoonist, does really good stuff. Since the Cleveland accent is so nasally, his word balloon tails go right up the nostril of the speaker. It curves around and then goes right up the nose. If you see a word balloon tail going up somebody's nose, you're probably looking at Durf. Who's a marvelous cartoonist and a really good guy.
But you know what? Also, I should say that when comics, I think, start to really click in 1910, 2030, what's interesting is that you also have sort of a metropolitan coagulation of cartoonists that literally live near each other. So you would have New York, you would have London, and you would have, to some extent, Toronto, Chicago, where like areas where cartoonists were actually sitting next to each other, teaching one another, because obviously there weren't schools for this, but teaching each other, and they would see one another's work in newsprint and go, oh shit, that's a better way to do it than the way I was doing it. Oh, this is a better way to do paneling. Oh, this is a better way to do word balloons. And it was interesting to see them learning from each other. And so for me, that kind of interwar period of between 1910 and 1940, that to me is when cartoonists just had the sort of explosion of life and interest that they didn't have in Victorian times. Go ahead, Brad. What were you going to say?
That same thing happened in Connecticut. I believe it was Connecticut for syndicated cartoonists. Have you ever read about that? Where a bunch of these folks were living within a few blocks of each other in Connecticut, and they would all do much the same thing, is kind of do information sharing and cheering each other on, and of course playing golf together.
Yeah, having whiskey sours at 10 a.m. Yeah, exactly. But honestly, though, it is fun to read through, Nathan, if for no other reason than just to see cartoonists trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I will say one other thing. I've mentioned this before on the show. I don't know why. I do not know why. But 80% of the jokes from England in the Victorian period of cartooning somehow seem to involve coal. I don't know why that is.
Really?
Every third joke is a coal joke. I guess because you had a lot of coal around the house to keep warm.
Yeah.
Babies were always trying to eat coal, which is always a weird thing to me that we don't talk about anymore because it's like minerals. You know how kids always put things in their mouth?
Yeah.
Apparently babies were always trying to eat coal. So there's a bajillion Victorian comics about babies trying to eat coal. It's weird. It's always about stoking the fire or all the boilers not working. All the Victorian comics are kind of like, are we all talking about pantaloons? What the hell is this humor? It just doesn't work anymore. None of it works anymore. So that's another thing, is that the humor is just distant enough where it's real stale.
Yeah.
It just doesn't hold up, you know?
Well, listen, speaking of things getting stale, well, that's not a good transition. How about this? We've come to the end of another hour of comics advice here on Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my coal-loving friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend, the Cole Porter of comics, Dave Kellett, co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And of course, our two sponsors for today's show, The Great Comic Craft, which is having their sale on January 1st. Put it on your calendar. Their font sale on January 1st. Do not miss it.
And you're going to want to go to comicbookfonts.com for that. That's Comic Book Fonts.
And the way you can remember that is that they sell comic book fonts. See how that works, Brad? See how that's good branding right there. And of course, you're going to want to head over to Wacom at wacom.com, the makers of the Wacom One, the good folks there at Wacom. Thank you so much for sponsoring the show. And Bradley J., let me say this, Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab. I say, Marigold, did you see Prime Minister Disraeli today on the wire?
Oh, well, yes, I did. Tell me all about it.
I say, he seemed like a baby chewing a piece of coal. Yes, we've landed another joke here in our Victorian comic. We'll see you next week on the pages of Punch.
I thought he was still assembling his cabinet.